Please feel free to stand up and do calisthenics or whatever. I know it feels like it's gotten colder since I started the film. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I see a hand back there. Oh, okay. Yes.
Incredible movie. I mean, I found myself crying about 8 or 9, maybe 10 times.
Good.
Maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. I'm getting much more sentimental, but I identified in so many ways with your own journey, my own family, and it was just incredible. I loved the first one, and I didn't think you could top that one. And it was just a beautiful narrative, a personal narrative, which told us so much about history, about the history of America, of China, of Chinese Americans. And so, thank you so much. Amazing work.
Thank you. It's actually been a great pleasure and gift to be able to make these films because they were really the questions I had growing up. So I just really have felt like this is a journey I can share, like you say, with many, because I think it really does reflect so many of our histories. And whether you're Chinese or not, if it makes you reflective and think about how your family got here, that is the prize for me. When I got a letter from, an email from a young woman, this was last May, it showed on PBS, and I received an email from a young woman who said, it was late at night, I was starting to do my homework, the TV was on, and my remote control was broken. So I had to see your film. And it changed my life, because my parents and grandparents are immigrants from Mexico. And it really made me stop and think about their lives, and it made me realize that maybe some of my problems were smaller than I had thought. So those are the soul rewards, soul points that you get when you do a film like this. I want to point out that most of the footage that you saw in Chinese Couplets was shot by Emiko Omori, who's back there. Stand up. Oh. Shot all of Carved in Silence, which you saw clips of. You see, I was very frugal. I did recycle some of my older films. It helps tell the swath of story. It was, complicated to try to bring in history, but also to show how history and things that are happening around us really affect our lives, and it's taken many years to appreciate the intersection of those things. And we're living in such tenuous times now, it's a little bit frightening. So I hope to use the film to really have that conversation and put a face to immigration and the impact of policies that affect all of us.
Just a quick note, I thought that the storytelling was amazing. It was just so natural, and we felt like we were there. And great work in photography. I'm actually a professor of journalism at Shanghai University in China. I'm happy to say we have a group of students, about 8 students up there sitting in the front who are here to learn all about the Chinese American experience. Students, please stand up. And,
okay. Welcome.
Yeah. Oh.
Yes, I saw Helen. We're in the fight together.
And we hope that we'll be taking your film and sharing it with a lot of other students so that they'll be able to learn what we learned today. Thank you.
Get the educational copy, not the...
Absolutely.
Send me there. I'll come to your talk.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
You did manage to save a box of photos of your papa after his sudden passing. Ooh, I would be very regretted if anything happens to my family photos.
It was very shocking to find that my mother was prepared to throw them out. But I think that, there were other, I could never figure out why she would be willing to throw out the photos, but I'm lucky that I was able to rescue them before I beat the garbage man.
Hooray!
Yes.
Can I ask you 2 questions?
Absolutely.
The first one is, have you been able to keep in touch with your family in China? And then the second question is, do you have another documentary in the making?
The family in China, the youngest uncle, or son, was just here with my aunt, his son, daughter-in-law, and 19-year-old granddaughter. Right after Christmas, all 5 of them were at the house, and I'm happy to stay in touch with them, and I was really happy when they left. It's funny because my aunt, this is kind of a recognition of the cultural differences. My aunt, who I see rarely, but when she entered the house, my house, she was the oldest Chinese lady in the house. She took over. She started putting things where she felt they should be. She asked me where the mop was. So anyway, I could see where in an older time when the daughter-in-law, had to listen to the mother-in-law in old-time China, that would have been a very challenging situation to be in. In terms of future projects, I have several in the back burner. I have a lot of footage of the Chinese in Cuba when I was there 2 times, 1998 and 2003. And I'd love to do a half-hour documentary about the Chinese in Cuba. It's a fascinating story in its own right. And every time it comes up in my film, it always surprises a lot of people who don't know about that diaspora of the Chinese who went there. But there really was the largest Chinese-Cuban community, I should say, in all of Latin America at one time. The other one that I'm working on, and I hope to, has a working title now, Shirley's Trousseau, is that I inherited a trunk full of clothing. It was the hope chest of a woman who died in 1943. And a few years ago, her brother contacted me and asked if I could find a home for this trunk. In this trunk, Shirley Chan is her name. She had been putting together her trousseau, literally had Chinese dresses made, some Western dresses, linens. She was starting a new life, and she died before it could happen. So it's a time capsule. And I just recently sent off for her death certificate, and I'm going to go to the National Archives to find out more about her life. But I thought that this would be a wonderful jumping off point to invite a number of different artists, choreographer, painter, poets, a filmmaker, to interpret the trunk any way you want. Who might she have been? As it turned out, she could have been my mother. So anyway, that's a project I'm very excited about. And on my website, lowdownproductions.com, I have a little video trailer I made. And the third one is a graphic novel I'd like to do about Mark Lai. So those are what's on the back burner. But when you make a film, you need to really put a lot of time into making sure it gets seen. Because for me, the investment of time means that I hope it to have a long shelf life at universities and schools so that people can learn and use it as an effective teaching tool. Yes?
Yes. I say it's good to see you again. I know you don't remember me, but first of all, I want to say thank you for doing this. Thank you for being real, down to earth. That's the reason why, you feel that closeness, whatever. I remember your mom, your dad, Will, and your aunt Emma, and Joyce and Carol, and Leland, and all that. I used to, my grandmother, wherever she goes, like always in life, we're always together.
Right.
So your aunt Eva would always have, every year they have a big New Year's party. 2 girls, pigs, and all that, and they march on all night, And I remember you, before this, you didn't know me at the time. But
what's your name?
my name is Carol. I'm from Stockton.
Yeah, okay, Stockton.
And guess what? I live on 10th Street in Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. But it was good to see you again. I've always, I don't know you, but yet I feel like I do know you, And
It's all been on the screen now.
Yeah.
No secrets. Not you anyway.
So I don't know, it's nice. Kind of like it brought me back past, back then in my happier times, with my grandmother, a lot of memories and everything. And I always thought you were very, very attractive. You still are.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more comments like that? I'll take it. Yes?
In your movie, you use some of the dialogue that your daughter had when she talked to your mother. What is a conversation you had with your mother that is really memorable?
I think that the most honest conversations with my mother came after Alana greased her up. I mean, my mother honestly kept her mouth shut about her past. And even as I was doing films about the history of Chinese in America and different experiences, she rarely offered anything. And frankly, you know, children can be trained to stop asking questions because you ain't gonna get anything, right? So I was inspired primarily by my daughter's discovery of my grandfather having gone to Cuba. And from there, I was able to sometimes get more information from my mother. But I think one of the most telling things about the experience, after Alana discovered the Cuba piece, and then you heard that message, it's from a message machine, where my mother comments about, you know, it's fine if you go to Cuba, but keep me out of this. You know, I resented him, he abandoned us. It was after hearing that message, and it was really on a little mini tape. That's before digital, you guys down there. But it was on a little mini cassette. And I pulled it out, not thinking one day I'll use it in a film, believe me. I just pulled it out because I had never heard my mother so emotional and intense. I mean, she was angry at me, surely, but this was a whole other feeling that I heard in her voice that seemed to be filled with so much emotion and pain and, you know, a lot of different feelings. So I pulled it out and I put it on a shelf. And as I started to construct this film, which was many years after the fact, we were trying to think about ways in which to have my mother be very present in her own life story. And I recalled that tape, and so I used that. But it was really, for example, you saw the footage of when we were in China, and I was talking to my mother, trying to get her to talk a little bit. That was probably the most emotionally honest material or exchange, I should say, that we had had. I mean, she had stepped up in a number of ways. When Alana was sick, she was really there. So, you know, over the years, of course, our relationship changed, shaped. As I became a mother, I could appreciate her a little bit better. But, you know, in all of these ways, it was only at the end that I realized that even when we went to the house and I had ambition or hope that, oh, this was going to be the moment, you know, everything was going to break loose, that because the house wasn't the same house, you know, it didn't have that meaning. But nonetheless, because of the process and our journey, she had opened up. And that's really all I wanted, you know, so in that way it was very successful trip. Anybody else? I see somebody's hand back there.
Just two questions. Was your mother able to find her parents' graves? And the second question is, do you have any information about your grandfather's life after you got back to China or Cuba?
I don't know. My grandfather died quite shortly after he returned to Cuba. And your first question again was?
Was your mother able to find her parents' graves?
Oh, no, she wasn't. That's why, you know, they have those walls in many of the Chinese villages. They have the temple walls, and where they can't find the graves, that it becomes the way in which they can honor their ancestors. So, no, we weren't able to find the grave. Well, are there any other questions? Yes?
In the movie, in the films, you say that you, due to the military action, so you got into journalism, and you find that you being a dumb minorities, you will get an advantage or disadvantage?
I think the advantage was that I was in the right place at the right time when they had affirmative action training programs. And we're talking about the late 60s, early 70s. It was a time where some of the many industries were trying to get more women and people of color into different fields. And so I moved to New York and was accepted into two really excellent programs to train to do work in film and television. And one was at WNET in New York, and then the other was with Columbia University, where I trained in broadcast journalism. I worked then as a news writer and then a reporter for KNBC in Los Angeles. I wrote news for Tom Brokaw. I moved up to San Francisco, and then I got an opportunity to do some on-camera street reporting, host some community affairs shows. But I found really that what I loved about the work was the storytelling, and being on camera was not so important to me. So I then went on to begin producing longer pieces, and then became a documentary filmmaker. Yes?
I think you must have a lot of thinkings and reflection while doing the first and the second films. So what are the differences and similarities? So did the formal experience inspire you to doing your mother's story?
Yes and no. I mean, I did some films in between. So the second film I did after China Land of My Father, I did a film that also took a very long time to make called Carved in Silence. And that's a story about the experience of the Chinese detainees at Angel Island Immigration Station and the role it played in terms of enforcing the Chinese Exclusion Act, and also to show the poetry that was written on the walls there. And while you folks are from China or are here, I hope you have an opportunity to go out to Angel Island, because it's a phenomenal place. And I was very involved in terms of preserving that site. After that, I was hired, I think it was mentioned by Francis. I did a film about Chinatown and the history of Chinatown. And that was done for a TV station about different neighborhoods. And in fact, you know, what's so interesting about all my films, in a way, they all inform one another, is that in Chinatown, I spent more time talking about the earthquake and fire in 1906, which played a huge role in terms of the paper identities. And just as a quick primer, in 1882, when Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, there was this narrow exempt class. So if you didn't fit the exempt class, which was teachers, merchants, students, and citizens, or children, minor-age children, you couldn't come to this country. And of course, it was an agrarian country, so very few people fit into this exempt class. Once the law was passed, the people who were here, the Chinese who were here, were stuck because they couldn't go back. If they went back, they'd never be able to come back to the United States again. And then the quake happened in 1906. And the quake and fire, which destroyed the main city hall, which had all the records of people who were born and died here, all the vital statistics, all sorts of records. So it created an opportunity for not only the Chinese, but a number of people to go and say, I'm a citizen, and there was no way of disproving that they weren't. So it created an opening so that if you became that citizen based on the fact that they didn't have a record to say otherwise, then you could travel back and forth to China. And before you left, you might have said, when I go back, I want you to record that I have a wife there and I have 2 children. So that person would go back, or else maybe they'd go back, and when they return, it'd be another person who said, well, I was back there, I got married, and I was there for 3 years, and I had 2 kids. And they're named number 1, son number 1, son number 2. So you fast forward again, 15, 16 years later, and in comes son number 1. And he's a child of a citizen. So, but the way that worked was that in Angel Island, they did cross interviews. So they would ask the sponsor to answer questions about the house they lived in, very specific things. How many steps are there to the front door of your house? Where are the windows in your house? Where does your neighbor, next door neighbor, what animals do they raise? So there was a way of trying to cross-check to see if the person really was the person they said they were. So all of these things are really the result of exclusion. and the cat and mouse game that was created about it. So it's had a profound effect on our community in so many ways. So I guess it's a long way of answering your question. How is one different from the other? I think this last one, Chinese Couplets, is much more comprehensive in its scope and mission. Because I think that I really, as somebody 30 years older now than when I made the other film, I really did feel and understand things much more than I did back then. So hopefully that shows in the two different films. Yes, sir.
I was wondering how your mom got to this country and nobody picked her up.
There was a mix-up with the time. My aunt, her sister did show up, but she showed up, she had the time wrong. So my mother did, really, she was just kind of lost on the dock there until this stranger from her village, I guess she knew him. She said, she had a conversation, she said, my sister's supposed to be here and she's not here, and so he took her to the sewing place, and then they called up my aunt, and then they did finally get together. But it was just a mistake. But it is a frightening prospect to land after all that you've been through, and then not have anybody waiting for you. Yes?
So for this reading, I overheard someone mentioning that it took you 17 years to
Yes.
all this, and that's insane. That's for me here. And I'm just curious about some of the challenges you faced throughout that whole process of
There are many, making films. Funding is one, huge one. But the storytelling, I think, was, in this case, very challenging for me. Because, as I said, my ambition or mission for this story was to try to weave many different strands of storyline and to find the right tone to balance, not hitting you over the head with a history lesson, but to see how that interacted with our lives. Also, really to look at what was going on in society. Somebody said, was it an advantage or disadvantage to be a woman and a minority? That really reflected the time I grew up, just as my mother's life, and the choices she made reflected the life she was growing up in that social setting. So that's why the Chinese Couplets refers to many different things in the story. So I would say it was a combination of sometimes readiness, even to tell the story. I would get to a certain place and I started off and I said, oh, wouldn't this be interesting to just talk about my mother, all her names? Like, why would a woman have 6 different names in her lifetime? And then I said, oh, maybe I should do that one and just the Chinese in Cuba. Well, all of these ended up being factors or storylines within the larger story. But it was really challenging to figure out the tone and voice and how to unroll the story so that it kept you interested too. Because what I did was take you on my journey as I uncovered the story. And that's really how it worked. Slowly, there were little pieces and little clues that helped me. They were like, crumbs that I had to follow. And so it took me longer than most, but there you have it. Some things are like that. I try not to beat myself up too much when I was saying, shouldn't it have been done? Or as somebody says, I saw a t-shirt the other day, and somebody, I hope I won't offend anybody, but the t-shirt front said, yes, I'm still working on my fucking documentary. And for those of you who know about the process, you understand that's such a true statement, because even as I'm, it's done, it's nothing unless it's seen. So for that, I'm very grateful that you've all come out to see it and tell your friends about it. Go for it. Yes, sir.
I really want to commend you for all of your determination and motivation to continue your story with your personal story. I'm a child of the youngest daughter of 3, and my parents were decided to both immigrated here in the early 1600s.
Well, my daughter, was really a very, very important part of the story. And I think that she is really, plays such a major role, for one thing, because it attracts younger people who could relate to her story much more than with me, right? I mean, they don't care about a white-haired woman, but they can relate to Alana. And so Alana had that curiosity, and my son, does, but, he's into music and he's into his world. And then I have nieces and nephews, and I have sisters and brothers, and I have to say that sometimes if you're the sister that does it, they say, well, she's doing it. So there you have it. And then with the nieces and nephews, I think they're all very grateful they have the story now, but whether they have the deep interest, that's crapshoot.
This is really, really great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, like I say, if it helps you kind of think about your own family and maybe inspire you to maybe do some investigation, it might be fun. Yes?
So if we want to share these documentaries with other people that we think would be interested in them, how can we do that? And how can we find your other works?
Okay. I have out in front, they're selling, and these are, just want to emphasize, filmmakers, we don't make a living that's credible, I would say. But what living I make is from sales, DVD sales, and honorarium. Right. But the DVD sales for educational markets, it's one price. For libraries, it's another price. What I have for sale outside are just home sales. In other words, if you want it for your private library, home use, you want to share it with a friend, fine. It's meant, honestly, I can't police it, but when libraries approach me or schools, then I say, please buy the educational version, which is set up a little bit different so that if they want to just show certain segments, they can. But I have my business card out there as well, and if you look at lowdownproductions.com, LOWEDOWN, Productions, all one word, I have the information on how to purchase DVDs, the different categories and so on. Well, if there's no other questions, I again thank you. And go outside and warm up.